to any other matters as the convention may deem advisable.
Now I have the distinct honor to present a person who represents the new Democratic Party of the 1970s as well as anyone in America. He is a young man. He is a United States Senator. He was elected in 1970 because he went to the people, listened to what they had to say, made their message his message, and won. He won against the biggest guns the White House could fire against him, including Spiro T. Agnew and President Nixon himself, who made 4 campaign stops against him in Florida, not counting stopovers in Key Biscayne. He won by walking the 1,000 miles from the tip of Florida to its southern tip, listening to the people. I now present the Honorable Lawton Chiles, Democratic Senator from the great state of Florida.
This will be the official welcoming address from the state of Florida by this 42-year-old senator from Lakeland, Florida. The keynote speech will be given by the state's governor tomorrow night, Ruben Askew.
Since I learned I'd been selected to make the welcoming talk on behalf of the great state of Florida, I've been thinking about how it happened that I was given this opportunity. 2 years ago, tonight, I was just halfway through my walk from one end of Florida to the other. And the first statewide poll showed only that 5% of the people recognized my name. I had no money in a race that required $1 million stake, and I was running against a couple of millionaires and a former governor in the Democratic primary, and a 16-year congressman and Judge Harold Carswell on the Republican side. Every day, I was listening to people I met on the road who were completely frustrated and mad at their government. Virtually every person I met felt this way. Whether he or she was young or old, black or white, rural or city, rich or poor, the feeling was the same. The government doesn't care a thing about me. No one will listen to what I have to say. At a place called Crossroads, I listened to a young mechanic, Daniel Sims, who worked outdoors, using a tree to hoist up the cars he was working on. The last year, he'd paid $3,000 in income taxes, and he didn't have any depletion allowance or accelerated depreciation or investment tax credit or deferred compensation plan or a family charitable foundation. He said he didn't mind paying to help people who couldn't help themselves, but he couldn't stand the thought of money he had paid going to people who refused to work, or planes that wouldn't fly, or weapons that wouldn't function. I listened to the frustration of a teacher in Sanford, Florida, Dorothy Gaethel, who had taught remedial reading under a federal grant to a class of 12 in the 10th grade, but who read at the 5th grade level. And she told me how amazing it was to see how they had improved with individual instruction. And as they improved, how they completely changed their attitudes and personalities, how they no longer wanted to drop out, but had a thirst to learn and participate. But then the funds were cut off and the program had to be discontinued. And she asked me why. An aircraft worker whose car was stopped at an intersection in Fort Lauderdale. And when I tried to talk to him, he told me through clenched teeth that it took him an hour and a half to drive home. And when he took his boat to where he wanted to fish, it was now polluted. He said he bought a house and paid more than he could afford to pay because his wife insisted they live in that neighborhood and send their daughter to a certain school. Now daughter was bused across town. His last raise was eaten up by inflation before he got it. And he asked me, now you tell me who the devil represents me. In Liberty City and Miami, I talked to a young black man, 24 years old, who had dropped out of school. He told me the only job he could get was to join the Army, and he knew that if he did, they would put him in a combat unit and send him to Vietnam. I talked to some small farmers at a cattle auction who told me that farmers are getting the blame because food prices are skyrocketing, and yet they're getting the same price for their produce that they got 10 years ago. And their feed, seed, fertilizer, labor, and machinery costs have gone up, and they have to produce more and more just to stand still. So the little farmer is being eaten up by the big farmer. He's forced to go to the city. Before my walk ended, I met thousands and thousands of others who never had a chance to see or talk to an office holder or a candidate running for office. They'd only seen them on television. And because I was out there where the people could see me and talk to me, they hoped that I would be different and that I would listen. So they elected me. That's how I happen to be here to welcome you. But it's not quite that simple, because the people that I listened to got to me. I found that they love this country. I found that they're way ahead of their leaders, that they want to have a part in solving the problems. And they looked me in the eye and asked me, will you come back? Will you be different? Will you listen? So because of how I got elected, I carry a burden of how to keep faith with the people, and that burden has only increased since I've been in the Senate. And because of that burden, I do welcome you as delegates to this convention, but with the same challenge that the people gave me. Will you be different? Will you listen? You must be wondering, too, how you happen to be here. 86% of you have never attended a national convention. 37% of you are women. 15% are black. 22% are young people. 100 are Spanish-speaking, and 22 are Indians. How did this happen? It happened because the Democratic Party was trying to listen, was trying to open up the system. It may not be perfect, but we welcome the tremendous change that has been made. And to the young people that we ask after Chicago to come in and work for change inside the system, instead of standing outside and throwing rocks, I say welcome. You really took us at our word. It looks like all of you are inside. Now we're kind of scared as heck about what you're going to change. We welcome the people that are on the outside of this hall, who are committed to the American dream, and who have come great distances to express their concerns. But with this warning, in your hands now rests the answer to the question of whether meaningful protest can be allowed, and whether any city will allow a national convention to be held within its gates. And we make a welcome to all those workers and volunteers who have spent untold hours planning for the comfort and safety of all of us who are here. And tonight we welcome the millions of Americans who are attending this convention by television. I really don't know what you're going to see here. Probably before this night is over, you're going to see a tremendous fight. But I can tell you what you're not going to see. You're not going to see any staged demonstrations for candidates by hired people. You won't see the acting out of a prepared script which has been agreed to by bosses and power brokers. You may not like everything you see here, but I remind you that for the first time, you could be here voicing your own feelings. You could have gotten your friends together and gone to one of the caucuses or conventions that selected the delegates. For the first time, you didn't have to be a yes man or a party leader or a friend of a politician and on his list to be a delegate. And I wish for all of the forgotten Americans who feel that no one speaks for them, that I could give them a welcome, like our great lady, the Statue of Liberty, gives to those who come to our shores. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuge of your teeming store. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I will lift my lamp beside the golden door. But I want you to know in 1972, the Democratic Party is rekindling for you that torch of hope that the lady holds aloft. Like a welcome breath of fresh air, it's cleaning out the smoke-filled rooms. It's sweeping out the self-interested boss rule and sweeping in the interest of the people. Because for the first time in the history of our country, a convention is open for the people to run the show. How can anyone believe that this convention, with all of its diversity of people and interest, Wallace people, McGovern people, Humphrey people, young people, black people, rural people, people from slums, Indians, could possibly accomplish anything towards the goal of trying to provide a government that everyone could believe in and participate in? Only if you believe in America, the very purpose for our country, that there could be a country where people could govern themselves. So tonight, we welcome the spirit of America, and we welcome the spirit of hope and the spirit of love, and we welcome the challenge to help fulfill the divine destiny of America. Remember with me tonight Thomas Wolfe when he said, "Go, seeker, if you will, throughout the land, and you will find us burning in the night. To every man his chance. To every man, regardless of his birth, his shining golden opportunity. To every man the right to live, to work, to be himself, and to become whatever thing his manhood and his vision can combine to make him." This, seeker, is the promise of America. You and I know we're not where we're going yet, but isn't it wonderful to be moving again and to know that we're finally on the way?
I gotta go. Senator Lawton Chiles of Florida, in his welcoming address to the convention. It was a short one, as you heard. All of the speeches are supposed to be short this time. It's part of the new reform. We'll see how it works. It's going to be limited to 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, except perhaps tonight for the temporary chairman, Lawrence O'Brien's opening address, and that one may run as much as a half hour. CBS News coverage of the Democratic National Convention will continue in a moment.
On the expressway, traffic is very heavy. At slow speed, you can expect frustration, but no big trouble.
Allstate presents an instant replay of $3,300 worth of little trouble. None of this damage had to happen, but bumpers that are shaped like spears, bumpers that aren't the same height, bumpers that don't protect cost American drivers $1 billion a year in needless damage. Bumpers on the 1972 cars are improved, but there's still a long way to go. To encourage better bumpers, Allstate continues to offer a 20% discount on collision insurance for cars that can take a 5-mile-per-hour barrier crash, front and rear, with no damage. Allstate says, let's get it done. Let's make driving a good thing again.
One of our stalwarts here, as in conventions past, is Eric Severide, our CBS News national correspondent. Eric, you're a veteran of many of these Democratic and Republican get-togethers. Have you ever seen a convention shaping up quite like this one?
Walter, I was just in the gentleman's room down the hall, and a man said, this is the only place in this convention hall where a man knows what he's doing. No, I've never seen a convention in the first place with so many delegates and alternates. There are thousands of them here. That makes a great problem of finding that line between participatory democracy and a kind of chaos. I haven't seen a Democratic convention unattended by the last president of the party, though he's alive and well. And I haven't seen a party organizing to try to beat the Republican opposition while trying at the same time to reorganize themselves. I haven't seen a repudiation of so many office holders among Democrats. So many not here, only 19 governors out of about 30, for example. And I've never seen a front runner come into a convention with such a long lead based on only about 1/4 of the primary votes cast. And a man who runs only about 30% in the latest national Gallup poll taken right on the eve of this convention among Democratic rank-and-file voters. It's a very issue-oriented convention. These people are people of ideas as well as ideals, but strangely enough, the great fight, the critical things come over rules and procedures, because back of that, of course, is the territory of these delegates. The credentials matter, and that means power. I haven't seen a Stop Somebody coalition that had nobody to coalesce around. There are similarities, of course. You go back to '52, the Taft-Eisenhower fight. The Eisenhower people, who were very shrewd, very good publicists, made a great deal of that slogan, "Thou shalt not steal," concerning the Texas delegation that Mr. Taft thought he had. That helped them. And I think there's a bit of that same air of superior moral rectitude among some of the McGovern people here tonight. But I've got my old friend Theodore White. I first met in China in '43. I didn't know we'd end up here together at that time. Theodore, are you wired for sound and high thought?
I'm wired for sound and some rambling thought, Eric.
Well, ramble ahead.
Oh, the name of the game is the same. The name of the game is power. What George McGovern has done is assemble some new forces this spring across the country who want to organize power and use power in a way totally different from the Democratic tradition. So you could be almost apocalyptic when you speak of what's happening here at this convention, whether this party will tear itself apart or whether it will patch up some sort of compromise, whether it could, the issues that are being laid before it are what role we play in the world, how we end the war, what sort of party it will be, how we divide up the American people so that it's calm as it can be outside, not like Chicago. But I think behind all this Talmudistic sophistry that we're going to hear this evening, there's real trouble coming.
You mean in the convention or in the campaign?
Oh, I think both. I think behind all the technicalities is the effort of this party to find a new majority. Does there exist a majority in this party which can give it a guidance? And whether the winner after that can sew this party up or not is a matter of political artistry.
Some of the people, especially those around McGovern, say this party no longer has a center. I suppose centers shift their boundaries, but if there isn't some mainstream that they identify with, I would think they're in great trouble. Surely there's some kind of center, isn't there, Teddy?
That remains to be. Their governing theory this year has been that this country must change, that the country is bursting with frustrations, and the key word is alienation, that things can't go on as they are. I think it comes out basically in their feeling about the war. This was organized first. The McGovern thing rests upon an anti-war movement. Goes on from there to a complete analysis of our defense, and then to all those other things we're going to be hearing about.
The war is really the heart of this thing, or the beginning of it. I get a feeling this party is maybe halfway through a rather profound transition, but by no means is this process over. And now they have another campaign to confront.
I would almost like to be a foreign correspondent here, because I think no political convention that I've attended will affect the rest of the world as much as this political convention may. How much do we cut down in Europe? Or it will affect us here at home. Are we going to quotaize the American people? Are we going to divide ourselves up biologically? What kind of society do we want to have?
Well, whether it affects the rest of the world, of course, depends on whether they win in November. One of the odd things here, to me anyway, is the attempt to have a kind of mirror image of this divided and fragmented society. It's not one man, one vote that they all talk about. It's one group, one vote would be closer to it. It's like going back to the old regime in France before the revolution of the estate system. Groups, professions, the clergy, whatnot, nobility should have so much representation. I find this odd. I find it not really very it's productive in a way.
The Democratic Party used to be the party of the professionals, the party of the closed doors. If they ran the cities and the states, they let people like Roosevelt and Truman run the world. Democratic Party now is in process of enormous transformation, where they do want to bring the people in. I don't think they've yet found the perfect way of bringing all the people in. I have an almost subversive sense that there may be too much of a good thing going here, but we'll see how it goes the next 8 or 9 hours.
I think we ought to talk later in the evening or in the week, Teddy. We're still here about this whole principle of quota, how it relates to the old American premise of each man a citizen without regard to where he came from or the color of his skin. I think it's a serious matter, and it's going to play a big role here.
We're going to have a lot of...
That's about all I wanted to say about it. I think maybe the hard news, if there is any more, is still pouring up into Walter's anchor booth up there. So, Walter, if you're listening, we'll turn it back to you up in the booth.
We're getting a little of it in both ears up here, I think, Eric. I think one thing that we haven't mentioned here tonight so far, really, although we have in some of our pre-convention programming, is the fact that this great change that you gentlemen just talking about, the Democratic Party, is going to be expressed and decided upon in many ways here at this convention, not just in the nomination of a president, the fight over the platform, whether it will be a little bit more radical than those in the past. And although that draft platform that came out of the committee isn't particularly so, there are going to be some floor amendments offered here that would move the party considerably in that direction. And the fight over the reform and a new charter for the party that would give the party a continuing policy-making function, which it has never had before between the quadrennial presidential election year conventions. They would have a convention every 2 years. All of those things will be quite important, won't they, as we go along through this week. Down on the floor of the convention, somewhere down there, or perhaps up on Collins Avenue. I don't know where she is. Michelle Clark has just come from a Humphrey briefing, I'm advised, at any rate, and has a report for us now.
Walter, I'm on Collins Avenue at Humphrey headquarters, not on the floor of the convention. And I did just come from a briefing with Senator Humphrey, who was in great spirits. He says he's looking forward to going into this convention. He's prepared for his fight, and may the best man win. One of the things he talked about, of course, was George McGovern and why he didn't show up at this afternoon's compromise meeting. He claims that McGovern's reasons were just pure bunk and a sheer political nonsense, to use his words, that McGovern really didn't show up because he didn't think he could properly defend his own views. But more importantly, perhaps for the first time, the senator talked about the strategy to make going to the convention tonight. Fact that it is a coalition of people, the Muskie people, the Jackson people, the Wallace people, Humphrey, Sanford, and so on, involved in the procedural fight. He says that he's not sure just where they're going to make their moves. They haven't made up their minds. They're going to pick and choose. That when the time is right and the issue is right and they've got the right amount of them. Their move. He said that it is for grabs. They aren't sure whether it will be California, in fact. They're thinking about a smooth move in terms of using Chairman O'Brien's ruling that only 1,433 delegates are needed for a majority, votes, I'm sorry, are needed for a majority in order to help get the majority of 1509 for Senator McGovern, which is a kind of a complicated thing that I don't think any of us really understand. The question came up also whether after all of this is over, they would challenge the entire Credentials Committee report. He said he has made no decision on that whatsoever. He says it's unlikely, but after all, we're engaged not in lovemaking, but politics. That's all. This is Michelle Clark at Humphrey headquarters.
Thank you, Michelle. The candidates, of course, for the presidential nomination by tradition don't come to the convention hall, so they're all in their convention headquarters, which are hotels along Miami Beach tonight. They won't be here at all. CBS News coverage of the Democratic National Convention will continue in a moment.
When we bought that big old house we always wanted, there were problems. The paneling looked so dull and dingy. But new Liquid Regard saved us.
Liquid Regard conditions. Its organic oil restores the beauty of paneling, and a special polymer keeps wood glowing for a long time. Liquid Regard even helps hide scratches. It also removes stubborn dirt with ease and gives cabinets a new glow.
Regard gave our wood paneling a beautiful new look.
New Liquid Regard Wood Panel Conditioner from Johnson Wax.
Raid House and Garden Bug Killer. Kills bugs dead.
I said to the man, give me the stuffed peppers. He says, you're making a big mistake. I says, but I love stuffed peppers. He says, you're making a big mistake. I said, listen, I know what I want, and I want the stuffed peppers. I made a big mistake. Took some Alka-Seltzer.
Alka-Seltzer neutralizes all the acid your stomach has churned out. For acid indigestion or headache, take Alka-Seltzer and feel better fast.
Don't make a big mistake. Take Alka-Seltzer.
Think how clean you could get your dentures if you could get in there with 1,000,000 tiny scrub brushes. That's Polident tablets. Green Polident has Dentrol. It gives Polident cleaning power like 1,000,000 tiny scrub brushes, scrubbing away at film, odor, and even stubborn stains between teeth. They don't stop till dentures are thoroughly clean. Does Polident really sound like that? No, but it really cleans like that.
There hadn't been anything going on the floor down there since Senator Childs made his speech. There are a couple of more welcoming speeches to be made by the mayor of Miami Beach, for one. And meanwhile, the New York delegation left the hall about a half hour ago and caucused, and some of the members are back now. Mike Wallace is down there with them. Mike?
Walter, Jan Yallum is this lady with me. She comes from Kingston, New York. Miss Yallum, you people from New York have been out of the hall now for about 3/4 of an hour. What's been going on?
We've been caucusing in room A, which is in the caucus room area, way at the end of the convention hall facility. Our meeting was just about concluded when there was a noise and riders. We could see it in the upper staging area, visible from the caucus area. Some sort of trouble outside the hall. I have no idea what's happening. But something's happened now because I was at the back and we had just been told that this may be a very long session. I moved out, but the delegation was asked to stay there because some of the rioters had gotten into the caucus area.
But now when you say rioters, are you certain that there was anybody doing that kind of thing? Or
yes, it was visible as you came through a glass area from the caucus room area to the main area. There was a great deal of rioting going on outside there. I have no idea what it is.
And you don't know who they were or what they were?
No idea.
Well, why isn't the rest of the delegation
They are now filtering back in. You see, they have now been let out, but at that point it was not safe because some of them had invaded that building. I have no idea who they were or what their cause was, but some had gotten into the building.
We had heard from some of the people, some of our own people at the perimeter, that the New York delegation in the caucus was going to ask Chairman O'Brien for more seats for poor people.
Frank, did you hear that? At the end of the Frank Branch?
We did vote to ask for seats for poor people at the convention.
Did you see any of the difficulty that Mrs. Yallum was referring to?
I just saw that there were a great number of police outside.
But no
Beulah
damage.
Sanders of the Welfare Rights Organization was at the New York caucus, and she did state that it was definitely not the Welfare Rights Organization that was outside, that her people had been instructed not to demonstrate at this convention.
I see. Well, now, as far as you people are concerned, your caucus, was it on matters of substance or procedure?
It was at matters on both. Richard Wade, McGovern co-chairman in our state, was telling us about the crucial votes that will come up tonight and the kinds of procedure that we as McGovern delegates should be following. Of course, our chief interests are the South Carolina and the California challenges.
All right, now let's stop on that South Carolina one for a moment. You were instructed how to vote on South Carolina?
No, we're not instructed. We, of course, are supporting the challenge in South Carolina.
You want more women in the South Carolina delegation?
We want more women in the South Carolina delegation, right. That is a specific issue. And, of course, in California, our position is very clear. Mr. Wade gave us very long, detailed instructions. He said he knows we are all new delegates, that others don't think we'll have the staying power, but he made it quite clear to us that we must have the staying power to sit here through all the procedures and all the parliamentarian devices. We can, if 20 hours if necessary, a seat must never be vacant, and we are staying to the end because it may all be wrapped up tonight.
Well, of course, that's how so many of the McGovern delegates were chosen to begin with.
Right. And
those in the non-primary states.
Right. And we have the staying power, and we will be here.
Well, I hope we do too, Walter.
I assume so, Mike. We've got a correspondent on the way to find out what that little demonstration was that Mrs. Yellen was talking about there in the hall adjoining this convention hall. It doesn't seem to be of great proportions. What she was mentioning, Mike, about the extra seats is that the Poor People's Coalition here, that's the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the National Welfare Rights Organization, the National Tenants Organization, all of them together have asked for 750 seats in the hall. Now, there are just not enough seats apparently to go around. They have been told they've been offered 75 seats, but they're not very happy with that and claim they ought to have a proportionate number of seats for poor people, as do the better well-off persons in the hall. They're apparently not getting them, and they're still unhappy about that. Dan Shore, you're there on the rostrum, and I understand that you have with you now, or have had in the last few minutes, Mrs. Pat Harris with you.
I have had and I have back again Mrs. Pat Harris, who is the lady who is the chairman of the Credentials Committee and who probably faces one of the most taxing jobs that a person has ever faced. Mrs. Harris has to present the reports on all the challenges and stand there while they are contested on the floor. Until about what time do you think you'll be working on this tonight?
Well, the estimates range from 12 to 21 hours. I would say that if one approaches all of these problems with pessimism, one will not be disappointed at this convention.
Let's talk first about a little bit of the good news. Do I understand correctly that the Kentucky challenge has been dropped?
Kentucky, Hawaii, and Virginia, I believe, have not pressed the minority reports.
And do I understand from the fact that on the Georgia challenge, that the minority report will be, the people speaking on it will be Governor Jimmy Carter and Julian Bond, which means that means they have accepted that as a compromise, right?
That is correct. I have not had any request from anybody to support the majority report, so we would anticipate that minority report number 1 would be adopted in Georgia.
Now, the tough one, now that we've discussed the good news, let's discuss the bad news, which is going to be California.
Depends on which side you're on, which is the bad news and which is the good news.
The bad news is just simply how long it's going to take and what an awful fight it's going to be, or don't you think so?
Well, I gather that there's been no special rule with respect to any minority report, and as a result, every minority report will have 10 minutes for the proponents of the minority report and 10 minutes for opponents of the minority report. So the expectation is 20 minutes of debate. The really time-consuming...
Not counting appeals and challenges from procedural rulings.
Well, of course, that we can't be sure of. We don't know what the appeals will be. I suppose that some of these could be decided earlier if there were votes in which the same issues could arise. I suppose that these could be determined even before California.
Let me ask you, Mrs. Harris, Senator Muskie had a proposal which he is now not willing to push forward, which would have achieved a compromise by splitting the difference on the 151 California delegates, 75 to Senator McGovern. He says he's not going to push that. Would that have been a technically feasible thing to propose on the floor?
It would have been difficult. It would have required, in my judgment, a suspension of the rules. And the rules, as I recall, require a 2/3 majority to achieve a suspension of the rules. Now, I'm not the parliamentarian of this meeting, and I don't propose to speak authoritatively on that, but that's my memory. So it would have been difficult, but not impossible.
There are some who say that the Muskie proposal is not dead, and that it could still come up.
Well, we all know about Phoenix and resurrection and what have you, and I believe it could be possible. I don't know that it will come up, but I don't think we can count anything or anybody out at this convention until the gavel goes down the last day.
Are you going to be on your feet all during the credentials debate?
Well, I have this nightmare of suddenly drooping to the floor in a sound sleep sometime around 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, since the prediction has been we might go as late as 10. But I'll stay on my feet as long as I can.
Do you wish now Senator Hughes had gotten your job?
Well, it's been an interesting kind of experience. The major part of it, the Credentials Committee meeting itself, was a very reassuring one for me. We had excellent meetings in which people ended up friends despite reports to the contrary. And the most reassuring thing was the party we had the night we adjourned, in which people who had voted on opposite sides on every vote were clearly good friends because they had come to respect each other. I would not have missed that experience at all.
Thank you, Mrs. Harris. Walter, one added detail. The credentials fight is expected to start at about 10 o'clock tonight, and from that time on until it is over, Mrs. Patricia Harris, chairman of the Credentials Committee, will be up there on her feet, not presiding. Presiding will be Larry O'Brien, but submitting that report. Walter.
Dan, let me ask you a question there while you have Mrs. Harris with you. There are 16 challenge delegates in the South Carolina challenge, or actually 9 of them under challenge, I suppose. They want to expand the delegation to 7 more. In that expansion move, in order to get more women on the delegation, does that create an actual challenge to some of those now sitting so that we could have a test vote on South Carolina as to the numbers that would comprise a majority?
My understanding of it is in South Carolina, and I'll check it with Mrs. Harris, who cannot hear you. My understanding is that the challenge in South Carolina actually refers to 9. That the women are demanding that 9 men be unseated and replaced by women. So that it's a challenge that refers to 9. The question is, how many challenges are there in South Carolina? Is it?
Well, there's only one minority report in South Carolina.
How many persons, how many delegates are being challenged?
I keep a book for the purpose of answering such questions, but at the risk of making a terrible mistake, my memory is that it's a request that 25 men have their votes reduced.
To 16.
To 16, and that women be added to that delegation.
So that the challenge refers to 9 men.
No, it refers technically to 25 men who will have a reduced influence in this convention because their vote will be reduced. That is, the impact of their participation will be lessened by the addition of women who will have some impact where they now have none.
But there's no intention to expand the delegation.
Well, we have a little joke in the Credentials Committee meeting. We talk about adding votes and adding bodies. We've added lots of bodies and no votes. And this is a case where we're adding bodies but not votes. We're not displacing people. If you let me check this little notebook, I can be accurate on...
Suppose we come back and check it a little bit later. All right, Walter, as best as we can make it now, that's Mrs. Harris as she prepares to go into the ring with credentials.
All right, Dan, my point was just whether or not there are people who are going to be unseated in South Carolina, and therefore could we have a test vote which would really give us an indication, even before we got to California, 3 more states down the list of credential fights as to how the chair's rulings are going to be treated by this convention, upheld or not.
Oh, well, the answer to that is that the chair will not entertain an appeal from his ruling on South Carolina unless there is a vote on South Carolina which would indicate the necessity for an appeal. I have a feeling I haven't made that absolutely clear.
Well, let's wait till we get to South Carolina. It'll come along in about an hour when the Credentials Committee fights begin. We've just heard from the grand old man of Florida liberal politics, Representative Claude Pepper, who addressed the convention in another welcoming speech. And another welcoming speech is about to come up from Mayor Chuck Hall of Miami Beach. And then for the major opening address by National Chairman Larry O'Brien and the temporary chairman of this meeting. CBS News coverage of the Democratic National Convention will continue in a moment.
There are all kinds of stocks I could buy, some for long-term capital gains possibilities, others for income. Then there are municipal bonds good for tax savings. Corporate bonds, they have advantages. Or maybe mutual funds. I don't really know what's best.
Isn't it time to get professional help with your investments? Isn't it time you talk to Payne Weber?
I'm David Fry. My business is copying. I'm here to talk to you about another great copier, the new AM 5000 from Addressograph Multigraph. They call it the crowd stopper. So fast, there's never a crowd waiting to use it. 50 copies a minute saves time and money. We're just as proud as punch. America deserves it. The crowd stopper.
This country club in San Francisco was one of the world's most famous. We came here to find out which cars have the more comfortable ride, the 1972 Continentals or that other American luxury car. The judges were all owners of that other luxury car. Nationwide Consumer Testing Institute blindfolded each owner, then took them for a test ride. They tested that other sedan against the Lincoln Continental. They tested that other personal luxury car against the Mark IV. Then they compared the cars for smoothness, steadiness, and quietness.
The Lincoln was much smoother and quieter. It kind of floated.
The Mark IV was quite a lot better. It was just the better ride, that's all.
All in all, 60 out of 100 owners of the other luxury car said that the Continentals had a more comfortable ride.
In all fairness to the test, the Continentals were superior.
The 1972 Continentals. We'd say the best cars won.
Back here at the Miami Beach Convention Hall for the 36th National Convention of the Democratic Party. It's still hearing short welcoming speeches by Florida dignitaries. Down on the floor, Dan Rather is with Mayor John Lindsay of New York, a one-time candidate for the presidential nomination on the Democratic ticket and a one-time Republican who, in 1968, seconded the vice presidential nomination of Mr. Agnew. Dan?
Good to see you. Yes, Walter, you know, we've said several times already in our coverage that there are a lot of new faces around this convention. One of them, a new face at a Democratic convention, is New York City Mayor John Lindsay. Mayor Lindsay, first of all, a few minutes ago, we had a report from Mike Wallace, my colleague who's covering in the New York delegation area, saying, number one, that there was a dust-up of some kind, some trouble over there. You told me that you weren't there, but your reports are that it wasn't anything serious.
No, it was the hastily called caucus of the New York delegation, but I understand it didn't amount to anything. It was not particularly important.
Now, what about the decision, and I understand this is a decision, to ask that 4 representatives of the poor people be seated in the delegation? Are you aware of that?
No, it really hasn't surfaced that much. I mean, we're bound to get those kind of pressures throughout the whole conference here. There will always be more groups who want to participate and be a part of it, and I wish they all could, you know, in some fashion or another. But I must say, I'm impressed with the openness of this convention. 80% of the people have never participated before. It's a very exciting thing.
Mayor, you're here as an uncommitted delegate.
Yeah, I'm officially uncommitted.
But let's get down to cases. How do you stand on the California challenge?
Well, I'm going to listen to the arguments. I quite sincerely want to hear the debates on it and see how we go on it. It'll be a long credentials fight, and I'd like to listen to it on the merits.
Could you give us a brief outline of what some of the pressures are on you? Have you felt the pressure from this side or that side?
No, I've listened to both sides so far a little bit, but I haven't heard a presentation yet of the Credentials Committee and the minority report that comes out of it. And I'm very much interested in listening to what they have to say. It's a very important challenge, and it's something that has to be listened to and respected.
Mayor, you've seen Republican conventions come and go over the years, and how do you compare a Democratic convention in philosophical terms with a Republican?
Well, this is a wonderful new breeze that's come through. I mean, you've got a whole United States of America here participating in this that have never participated before. I feel very badly that some of the older members feel they've been excluded from this convention, and I think that's unfortunate. But the most important thing that the winds of change are there, and I think change is important for the whole country.
Well, is it really that much different a convention, though. I believe that the average income is above $20,000 a year among delegates. That would strike a lot of people as the kind of delegate representation you'd expect to find at a Republican convention, since they have the reputation of being the party of...
Well, this is a big change here. You got a lot of young people. You've got almost 50% of your whole representation of women. You've got a good representation of blacks and Chicanos, and Puerto Ricans, and Spanish-speaking people. You have the Indian population of the United States for the first time is represented in a very important way, and then I hope that there's a fair and equitable proportion of the older-time regular Democratic Party machinery that's here too.
Thank you very much, Mayor John Lindsay of New York City. Dan Rather on the floor. Walter.
Thank you, Dan. I was going to ask you to ask the mayor if he still thinks he's any kind of a dark horse candidate for the presidency. Is he still around there?
Mayor Lindsay, Walter Cronkite, who's high in the booth, is always with us. Asked me to ask you, I should have on my own. In your heart of hearts, when you go to bed at night and dream, do you think about the possibility of being a dark horse candidate for vice president on a Democratic ticket?
No way, no way. No, I have no interest, and I wouldn't help anything either.
You have no interest?
It would not assist any ticket, and I have no interest.
But if someone came to you and said, we want you, you wouldn't turn it down, would you?
No, it's an academic question. It's not there, it's not going to happen, and it shouldn't happen.
How about for president?
But think about it. Thanks.
Walter?
You know, the name of the game here may very well be, as it is so frequently in any tight race for a nomination, the uncommitted delegates. There are a big block of those that will make the difference as to whether George McGovern goes over the top or not. And one of the fairly sizable blocks is in the Missouri delegation. Mike Wallace is with Governor Warren Hearns of Missouri right now. Mike?
Walter, as you know, Warren Hearns is holding on tight to that Missouri delegation, except that there are two defections in the question of California, two surprising defections perhaps. Senator Stuart Symington and Senator Thomas Eagleton, who are Muskie men, are nonetheless, on the basis of fair play, they have announced that they are going to vote for the McGovern people on the business of California. Governor Hearns, I wonder if you could tell me, Senator Eagleton and Senator Symington have both decided to leave you on the subject of California. They're going with McGovern and against Hearns, so to speak. Why?
Well, I don't know why, Mike. I guess you'd have to ask them. I can't be all things to all people. I'm for Senator Muskie, and I can't help him by voting for Senator McGovern in California. They seem to find a different way of thinking about it. I just cannot do it.
I talked to Senator Eagleton earlier, and he suggested that it's just on the basis of fair play that he feels that after all, George McGovern won those votes. I wonder if we could get you to stand up, because we're having a little difficulty seeing you, Governor Hearns. That he won. And I'm sure that you are just as interested in fair play as Tom Eagleton or Stuart Symington. And there's the senator right now.
Good to see you, Mr. Wallace.
Senator, we're having a little discussion now. I understand that you, a Muskie man, have decided to defect for just a moment anyway, that you're going to go with the McGovern people in
I think McGovern should get the California delegates. I'm for Muskie. 1 and 2.
All right. Now, why McGovern in California, sir?
Because I think that you should not change the rules after the game is completed.
Governor Hearns?
I think they've been changing the rules ever since they started with the McGovern changes. And they change them to suit themselves. And when I'm for a person, the only way I know to be for him is to vote for him all the way. And that's why I'm voting the way I am on California.
Do you have any idea? You have 73 votes here. 73 delegates. Do you have any idea how it's going to split on the California challenge in this Missouri delegation?
Oh, I don't have any exact ideas, but if I had to guess, I would say there would be around 22 or 3 that would vote for McGovern being seated, McGovern delegates in California. The remaining would be probably against it.
It's been suggested by some of the people in the delegation, Governor, that you got really angry at George McGovern When the McGovern people booed you at the state convention, the Missouri State Convention back on the 9th of June, that really got to you?
Well, I wouldn't say I got mad at Senator McGovern. I just think that many of the people who are for him in Missouri have been very rude, not only to me, but to many of the regular Democrats who've been working in the vineyards for every 2 or every 4 years for a great many years. And when you boo a courtesy resolution, to me, you don't have very good training in your earlier childhood.
Well, now they applauded Senator Symington, they applauded Senator Eagleton, they booed Governor Hearns. How come?
Well, they didn't applaud Senator Eagleton except when he talked about supporting Senator McGovern.
When Senator Eagleton talked about supporting Senator McGovern? Because he's a Muskie man, I thought.
Well, but the speech was tempered to the fact that McGovern was in a good chance of being, you know, first ballot and so on and so forth.
So you're just going to stay there with Muskie as long as Muskie stays in there?
I'm a Truman Democrat. Once I give my word, I'll stay there all the way.
Thank you very much, Governor. Walter, a Truman Democrat.
There's a lot of movement, of course, in these delegations. That is the story tonight as they get ready for the first test votes here, which will come on the South Carolina challenge and then get down to the big one, the California challenge, 4 challenges later. CBS News coverage of the Democratic National Convention will continue in a moment.
Allstate has life insurance that says you don't have to die to collect. It's our money-back plan. You get $10,000 of permanent insurance now, all your money back when you're 65. Every dime you paid in. Allstate Money Back. You get something back when your load gets lighter.
Happy, baby?
You're in good hands with Allstate, young man.
How are they going to get in?
Well, it looks kind of small.
Allstate Life Insurance says, if you die, young man, we can help make sure your little boy still has a house to live in. You can buy $20,000 of Allstate 20-year decreasing term, about $7 a month, if you're 30, say. Allstate, the young man's life insurance. You're in good hands with Allstate.
CBS News coverage of the Democratic National Convention will continue after this pause for station identification. This is CBS. CBS News coverage of Campaign 72, the election year, the Democratic National Convention. Tonight, the opening session. This broadcast is sponsored by Allstate Insurance Companies. You're in good hands with Allstate. Reporting from CBS News Convention headquarters in Miami Beach, here is correspondent Walter Cronkite.
Hello again. Out there on the convention floor, the convention has just heard from the treasurer of the Democratic Party, Robert Strauss of Dallas, who is resigning that job after this convention. He was reporting on the state of the party's finances, which aren't particularly good. They have over a $9 million debt left over from 1968. He did report, however, that 19-hour telethon over the weekend had done pretty well, and perhaps enough to retire a little better than half of that debt. He said they've got $4.5 million pledged from the telethon, and they expect to get a little bit more as mail contributions come in. They had some telephone troubles around the country, including the big area of New York City, where the telephone company wires were flooded out by a broken water main. Not unusual in New York these days. We've had some good news, I suppose you could say, here at the convention tonight. That's the way Dan Shore phrases it. The governors have been working. There are 19 of them on the accredited as delegates to this convention, 19 of the 30 Democratic governors, and 11 of those have been very active on the floor tonight, trying to work out some kind of compromise to cut down on this long series of what had expected to be about 15 state challenges to various members of the delegations. And they worked out a resolution of 4 of the disputes. We heard Dan report that from Mrs. Pat Harris at the podium a little while ago. We can add one more to that group. Now the resolution has come for Kentucky, Virginia, Hawaii, and Georgia. And when those reports come up, they won't be fought on the floor, and compromises have been reached. They also kind of have some hope of reaching 5 other compromises among the 15. That would retire 2/3 of the challenges tonight. But among those compromises, no one's expecting California or Illinois to be included. That's not going to happen, and that fight is coming to the floor of this convention tonight. There have been some straws in the wind through the day. We might be able to report a few of those to you quickly. Little straws, but they could add up. In Arkansas, for instance, where most of the delegates are pledged to Representative Wilbur Mills and his candidacy for the presidency. It's a 27-member delegation, and today they held a caucus, and the California challengers, that is the McGovern people, tried to appear before the caucus to express their side of the case, and the Arkansas delegation wouldn't even hear them. They're solid for Mills, and that means solid for the Stop McGovern movement at this convention tonight. The Pennsylvania delegation, they elected their delegation chairman. He's the former governor, George Leader, and he's expected to hold a strong rein on what could otherwise be an unruly 74-member Pennsylvania delegation, hold them strongly in line for Senator Humphrey. In Oklahoma, that delegation today, that was said by the leader of the delegation, Governor David Hall, that he thought that the McGovern forces had plumbed the depths of Oklahoma for added votes among their uncommitteds and hadn't gotten any more. And he says when Oklahoma begins to swing, he doesn't think it's going to swing toward McGovern. Yeah, on the other hand, on the other side, good news on the McGovern side, the delegation from the District of Columbia went as expected, almost solidly for McGovern. In their caucus, only one delegate is holding out. He's an AFL-CIO lobbyist, Philip Doherty, and he is not on the McGovern side, at least as yet, as is true with most of the labor members of the delegations here in Florida, some 400 of them. They split up among Wallace or Jackson or Humphrey, an old favorite of theirs, and they are not inclined to go for McGovern. There was also something said in the course of those reports that our men were getting from the various caucuses this afternoon. It was said particularly in the among the Delaware delegation, I think it was. Yes, it was Delaware, where they were reporting that the delegates were getting pretty tired of the strong arm being put on them by the two sides, the McGovern and the anti-McGovern forces. A couple of names were mentioned on either side, and the delegates were beginning to resist that kind of pressure, and particularly they said that it was strong from the McGovern side. And some of the Delaware delegates said that this was changing their minds, and they were maybe about to swing over, but now they kind of dug their heels in, and they were really definitely uncommitted. Well, it's all going to begin to come out in the wash here in the next half hour or so when we finally get down to the delegate fights. Now, speaking to the convention is John Y. Brown, who was the sponsor of the telethon and giving that report on the telethon's results that we mentioned to you just a moment ago. He says over $4.5 million in pledges, just about what I told you. David Shoemaker is at the McGovern headquarters at the Doral Hotel with a little background on the McGovern strategy for this convention. David?
Walter?
Excuse me. You can call me Henry.
George McGovern's aides, Walter, claim that they're going into tonight's test votes with an ample margin of strength, particularly on the California question. In the Situation Room upstairs, McGovern's total on the crucial California test is 1,560 votes. Of course, that's in the Situation Room and not necessarily down there on the floor. If they're right, that would be not only more than a majority of the delegates eligible to vote, but more than the 1,509 Humphrey forces had demanded to be the margin. If, as the roll is called on whatever becomes the test vote on California tonight, you might, Walter, want to check Ohio. McGovern's forces say they need 70 to 75 votes out of Ohio, and if they get it there, they think that everything else falls into place. They credit their strength tonight to systematic lobbying. We've been able to count more than 80 McGovern operatives who've been actively involved in nailing down the support. Just down the hall from the Situation Room in his own private suite, George McGovern is having dinner right now with his family. He seems more relaxed than in any time in the past week. He is tired, and he's also fatalistic about what happens next. Looking out his window, he says he can't help but remember Chicago 4 years ago and the violence in the streets. For all the talk about trouble here in Miami, McGovern told me the view from his window at least is peaceful, and he predicts that reporters' predictions of a long night may be slightly exaggerated. He has incidentally talked to Hubert Humphrey by telephone, suggested that they both try to keep their supporters from any more wild statements or charges. It's David Shoemaker at McGovern headquarters.
The other candidates also are, of course, not in the convention hall, as we know, David. Tradition says that they shouldn't be. Humphrey's in his new command post in a hotel a little closer to the convention hall, I'm told, than the Carillon, which is quite a way up the beach there. Senator Jackson said to be out having dinner with friends somewhere. Wilbur Mills at his hotel. Terry Sanford hadn't been located, the last I heard. And Eugene McCarthy's at his hotel. He's going back to Washington tomorrow. He's not even going to stay for the remainder of the convention. He's not much of a serious candidate, as you know, anyway. Quite a contrast from 1968, when it was his followers who were raising Cain out there on that floor, demanding a fair shake from the convention and trying to get their man a last chance nomination, despite the fact that quite clearly the incumbent Vice President Hubert Humphrey had it all tied up. Senator Humphrey himself met with reporters just a few minutes ago as he left the Carillon Hotel, and he was talking pretty tough, I gather. Bruce Morton, how about that?
Can we just ask whether you have enough votes either way to win the California challenge, or must you get a favorable ruling from the convention on what constitutes a majority?
I think that a ruling from the convention is going to be very necessary. It's my judgment. We have based most of our calculations on the majority being 1509. And I've got to say, I've just finished reading again the call of the convention and how anybody can say that 1,433 delegates represents a majority when the call of the convention says that the majority of the delegates in the convention, that the total number of delegates, you shall have to make a majority out of the total that are on the temporary list, which would be 1,509.
Are you saying then that if you don't get to a 1,509 majority, you're going to lose in California?
No, I think it makes it difficult, that's all, because our calculations were based upon what's the law. And the interpretation of the rule is a complete violation of the call to this convention. That call states there's only one other instance where you can have less than 1,509, and that's in the election of the chairman.
Senator, there are all kinds of complications, permutations, and elaborate equations in this thing of when you challenge and how you appeal. Have you got a strategy worked out that you could tell us about?
No, I won't tell you about it, but we definitely have. We've worked on it, and we're ready.
Senator, you
told
when
us
will you make that
upstairs
appeal?
This evening. This evening.
You told us upstairs that you could win the California challenge even if it took only a simple majority of those voting. That is 1,433 votes. Are you now changing that?
I think it's more difficult, I said. Our calculations had all been based. 1,509, that was a cinch. We knew we could win it on that. The 1,433 makes it more difficult.
I think the question was at what point, as you start down this list of challenges, presuming we start with South Carolina, do you and your coalition make its move on this question of majority?
I would imagine it would be around the California decision, but that is yet to be fully decided.
Frank Mankiewicz and Gary Hart both are saying tonight that they have enough votes to win this. Do you agree with that?
Frank Mankiewicz and Gary Hart have said many things. I recall that they've said they had enough votes here a while ago for a first ballot victory, and then they had to retreat. I expect them to say that. They're paid to.
It all may be academic. Our CBS survey now shows McGovern with 1,519 votes, more than a majority on the California issue. CBS News coverage of the Democratic National Convention will continue in a moment.
The sandwich has become an American tradition. Here's part of the reason why. Miracle Whip salad dressing from Kraft. Years ago, people discovered that Miracle Whip's lively blend of spices and rich, consistent creaminess make any sandwich taste better. So much better that Miracle Whip is America's favorite salad dressing. Miracle Whip from Kraft. There are a few things so good, nobody wants them changed.
No headache seems small when it's yours. That's why you should know the difference between plain aspirin and Bufferin. This illustrates by the time most of Bufferin is going to your headache. Most of plain aspirin is still in your stomach. And with Bufferin, there's less chance of stomach upset, too. So the difference can be important. Bufferin. Faster to your headache, better for your stomach.
From the time we first made a basic, solid, economical car into a station wagon, Ford has been a leader in making wagons. For over 30 years, Ford has made more wagons than anyone else. Now that we're making the basic, solid little Ford Pinto, what could be more sensible than for us to do it once more? Introducing the Pinto wagon. From the people who know what basic cars and solid wagons are all about. This is how it looks with the Squire option. Lift up the tailgate, fold down the rear seat, and there's over 60 cubic feet of cargo space. It also has flip-open back windows, a good-size engine, and front disc brakes. See the new Pinto wagon at your Ford dealers. When you get back to basics, you get back to Ford.
Mary Lou Berg, Vice Chairman of the Democratic National Committee, has just introduced Lawrence O'Brien officially, the National Chairman of the party, temporary chairman of this meeting, 54-year-old Northeastern University Law School graduate, the campaign manager for John F. Kennedy in his Senate and presidential campaigns. And here he is.
I welcome you to Miami Beach and the Democratic National Convention of 1972. We have come here to a great playground. But as proceedings later in the evening will undoubtedly confirm, we have not come here to play. We have come to work in harmony and in honest, open disagreement. And we have come to find out whether the Democratic Party has anything to say to the people of the United States. We must begin with a candid appraisal. Whoever we are, city dweller, farmer, housewife, worker, student, businessman, we seem powerless to stop a war, to make our streets safe for our families, to enforce fair policies of taxation, justice, or economic opportunity. Messages have been sent. But institutions, both public and private, do not seem to hear. Time, Give us time, say the politicians, educators, and administrators. When they hear us at all. But governments have collapsed, violent revolutions have swept across whole nations, and societies have vanished because the only answer to the people's desperate message was, give us time. More than time is required. If any institution is to remain alive in a self-governing society, it must respond truthfully to the voices of those being squeezed by the problems, to the voices of those who see their lives destroyed, their sons dead, their hopes blighted, their freedoms restricted, while their institutions sit in fat and splendid isolation. And their cries of distress become minor statistics in bureaucratic reports. Those cries come from every sector of American life. Yet if we listen carefully, we can also hear quiet affirmations of hope. This is America today, a country we devoutly love, but a country torn with anguish, so that our love is often clouded by bitterness and despair. Listen then to the people.
People were taken in by a bunch of political promises. I think that marked the end of an era. I think they had the hope that Nixon maybe, just maybe, would pull us out of some of the problems that have been plaguing. Said he would end the war. I think now they have learned it's just the same old 1-2.
I get this in my classes, and it's something which happens over and over and again. Kids talk about the fact that there's nothing they can do. They feel powerless.
I believe it would help our nation if the little man could speak for himself. And I believe that's what it needs to come to. Let the little man be heard.
I would like for my candidate to listen to the people and not get swallowed up in that ivory tower of Washington, D.C.
Well, people are certainly concerned about taxation. I think they'd like to see the corporations pay some taxes on their profits.
No, I'm not a tax authority, and I don't know who is and who isn't. But I know I'm a small businessman, and I know I pay it. And I know it's a tremendous amount.
Inflation and recession at the same time, people are disturbed. I think they're disturbed with the credibility of the president.
Mr. Nixon made several promises to us when he was elected, and he's broken all of them. He hasn't kept to one.
Oh, I don't distrust him. I just don't think he knows what he's doing just right.
Well, I think most of the people don't believe that the wage and price controls, in fact, are working, and that and where they are working, they're not working fairly. They feel like that prices aren't really being controlled, but wages really are.
We supposedly have got a price freeze, but in Mobile County, we have experienced anywhere from a 18 to 26% increase in the prices in the grocery store.
All of my equipment is so high, and it just makes it hard to compete with the other things that goes on in the neighborhood.
I think the war should have been ended years ago.
We have consistently refused to go to international organizations such as the UN or to call on neutral countries because I think, for one thing, that we feel neutral countries are our enemy.
We've put a lot of effort in, and we ain't getting nowhere. We're just losing a lot of men for nothing.
But beyond the Vietnam War is the whole question of how we go to war and why we allow a president to invade Cambodia on his own word, to mine the harbors of Haiphong on his own.
When I first got married, I took out hospital insurance, $68 a year.
The same insurance today is $361 a year.
I want a better life for my children, and I want to be accepted into, like, the Democratic Party. I have attended for many years the conventions. I've taken part. I have done my part. I've walked dusty streets to get the vote out. Yet I feel we have not really been represented, and we've never been allowed we've sort of been left out.
I want America to really be what it always has been and have the vision and go after that vision like we always did before.
Well, I want what everybody else wants. I want clean air and clear streams, and I want prosperity. I want a government that's really responsive to the average citizen. I think just the things that the average American does want.
I think we ought to have a country where people, people don't lie and people don't say things they don't mean, and people don't, where they're not afraid to speak out, and when they're just, where they're wanting to help people, you know?
I think we have a great nation, and I think if we all work together and strive, we can make it a greater nation.
I think we common people are the government, and we should tell the people that are on the Uncle Sam's payroll occasionally just exactly whose place they're filling, and that we are paying the bill. We're paying their salary. It doesn't come from the president down. It comes from us people up.
Yes, it comes from the people up. These simple, direct words sum up what many people have been saying. And in spite of a growing cynicism that is affecting the two-party democratic process, we have discovered in these last months that some people have not despaired. Their record turnouts in primaries and state conventions are clear evidence that a faith in political leaders and institutions still does exist. Now, as the National Democratic Chairman, it is tempting for me to capitalize on these feelings with the standard old political remedy. Send a Democrat to the White House, throw out Mr. Nixon and his Republican friends, and your problems will be over. But such a message would have two weaknesses. It wouldn't be true, and nobody would believe it. Now, make no mistake, I am proud to be a Democrat, and I am proud of our party's record in good men, good women, good ideas, and good works. The party of the people is unmatched. But an excessive pride in the past, coupled with future promises that few people believe, have brought our party, along with other institutions, to the present crisis of truth. Both political parties and their leaders are on trial this year. For the Democratic Party, the trial takes place this week in Miami Beach, right here in this hall, right now. What can we say for ourselves as this trial begins? We must not proclaim to America that the Democratic Party has all the answers to all the problems. But we must find at least some of the answers to take to the people for their judgment. We must write a platform that uses the good things of the American past as an intelligent springboard into the American future. A platform that inspires people with its imagination and its good sense. But we must do more than that. Our nominee must be even better than the platform, because the platform does not become the president. The person does. We need a constructive candidate who will not promise everything, but who will be certain after becoming president to deliver what has been promised. To put it simply, our first concern in these next few crucial days must be to act in such a way that Americans will be able to say about us, I trust these men and women. I trust this party. For 3 years, we have been laying the foundation for their trust. We have rebuilt the Democratic Party. We have anchored our reforms. We have anchored our reforms in a voice for everyone, a place for everyone, a fair shake for everyone. Now, some of you will say that the number of reforms has been too many. Some of you will say that the number of reforms has been too few. Some of you, perhaps a dozen, will say that the number of reforms is just right. But I think we would all agree that the reforms we have seen this year will be more than casually significant in the history of the Democratic Party. But now we must take our reforms to the people, all of them. The first challenge we face this week is to decide whether party reform will in fact make the Democratic Party better able to deal with our real problems, or whether party reform turns out to be an exercise in self-destruction. To succeed, we need everyone. To succeed, we need those who this year have said for the first time that they will fight beside us. To succeed, we also need those who, through thick and thin, for better or worse, in agreement and disagreement, have labored with us for a lifetime in the great tangled vineyard of American politics. We need everyone. And all of us here must figure out how we get everyone. But we begin with you, the delegates and alternates to this convention. And it is a good beginning. For who you are and how you got here is one of the most exciting and hopeful stories of this presidential year. "1972 will be remembered as the year that the American grassroots came back to life."
But somebody will have the floor and he'll mumble.
Democrats were politicking who had never done so before. This woman's caucus in Austin, Texas, includes supporters of at least 2 different presidential candidates.
Now, if you've got committees loaded with men, and you got enough, just stand up and vote no, and don't ratify, don't make them the permanent committee.
If there are any old pros here who still don't understand how so many ladies reach Miami, please take note.
Got to have a few floor leaders that work the floor. Yeah. And so when the floor leader says, everybody vote no, then everybody stands up and shouts no.
Yo sé que las reglas nacionales que pasaron en McGovern's Commission report dicen que tienes que...
The new rules put the brakes on a drift to third parties that would have fractionated American politics.
We have to remember that a lot of our precinct chairmen are gringos and they don't speak Spanish.
Minorities seize the opportunity with new hope of representation in the Democratic Party.
Ready to participate, and immediately we're cut back because they're not going to understand Spanish.
Has anybody ever been to a convention before? You all have. Yeah. They are pretty crazy things. No one knows who is doing, and it's very easy to get confused and not know even what you're voting on.
The role of students is already a legend. But older people also came out in even greater numbers to support the same or different candidates. Together, They use the many time-tested means of getting out the vote.
Then we'll be open.
You can see why the phone company really loves us, in spite of everything.
By the end of the week. Wallace headquarters.
Could I have
We're at 6452 Highway 90 Drive.
Every candidate and contending segment of the party was financed in unprecedented measure by small contributions. People of every means put their money where their beliefs were.
Won't be much this time. Retired people have to live a little bit.
Well, that's
different.
all right. Every little bit helps.
Now, how do I make this?
Wallace Campaign Fund.
We're getting ready for our first raffle drawing at the Fun Carnival, the Democratic Fun Carnival of 19...
In Austin, Texas, Democrats of every persuasion joined in a political fun fair to help pay expenses for the coming conventions. One fundraiser raffled off the politicians.
We start with Senator Joe Christie, a man that was the sponsor of the liquor by the drink bill, and he will be a bartender at your private party on a date after the May 6th primary. Secondly will be Barefoot Sanders.
Hey, Bill Cleese. How you doing? Good to see you. This friend of mine. He was out here when Joe Christie came out the other night at their union house.
Here, did I give you one of my folders? I appreciate your vote. Thank you.
In other places, the carnival spirit pervaded the political event itself. In this congressional district election in Atlanta, 3,000 voters were expected, 8,000 showed up. Thousands stayed many hours to vote again in the runoffs that decided who would come to Miami. It was the first time Georgia voters had ever chosen their national delegates in the voting booth.
We had business now. It's 8 o'clock.
To the best of my abilities. The duties upon which I am about.
In Mobile, Alabama, the balloting took place at the election district level.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Go to work.
All right, now, mister, you sign on this line, mister, on line 6.
More than 2/3 of the delegates at this national convention were selected in presidential primaries. In the 23 primary states, more than 20 million voted for Democratic candidates, a significant increase over 1968. These figures should make us ask ourselves, can we do it again in the big one in November? In rural areas, the new rules also brought out the voters.
See, you didn't go to this, so you don't know. We never have done this before.
Uncommitted to.
I'm sorry, but that's the way.
Many of you came here by way of the convention system. This precinct convention in Texas is, in its way, the prototype of all conventions. You did this from New England to the state of Washington.
Well, I think something very exciting is happening here in Texas, in that for the first time in the history of this state, we have written party rules. And in addition to that, they're very progressive, constructive party rules that give the rank and file people of Texas for the first time in the Democratic Party the chance to really show what their presidential preferences are at the grassroots level in a way that I think will have a big impact, hope it will, on the National Nominating Convention.
1,000.
The major difference between conventions was their size and the changing faces of our voters joining us in the selection of a presidential candidate. This is Clinton, Missouri.
Our other secret weapon is right here in this room, because this is the Democratic Party at work. This is a public meeting in Henry County. The door is still open even for latecomers. Any Democrat that walks in here, be he young or old, be he with short hair or long hair, be he male or female, can vote in this open convention. And you know, this is happening all over the state of Missouri and all over the United States. And everybody in this room is going to have a part at what happens in Miami in July. And that last man that is selected is starting right here now. And we'll all feel like we're a part of it, and he is our candidate, and he's the people's candidate, and that's why we're going to have victory this November. And thank you very much.
Eleanor Halley has been nominated. Are there...
By the time the county convention had been reached in highly populated places like Fairfax County, Virginia, which includes 2 entire congressional districts, the activity often reached a high pitch. But what was happening was that more Americans than ever before in history were becoming experienced in the give and take of open politics. This is a fact to remember.
Elected. Venus. A division is called for. We will count the House. Those in favor of Dina Sortland will rise, and the tellers will count the people rise.
60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66. You don't have to just said that you don't have to do it. As long as your name is down there on the Chisholm thing, that's all we want. All you have to do is go back and sit down and be counted. Just to make sure. I just didn't want to lose anything. Yeah, well, don't get wrong. Correction to the ballot. Okay, come on, let's go. Let's go back.
And I'm switching. Step away. He's for Shirley Chisholm, like we are. I mean, what is all that?
Okay, thank you.
It's been happening like crazy.
Okay, thank you. The new rules caused some confusion at all levels, and floor leaders spent a good deal of time trying to give a running account of what was going on, with varying results.
4 people of 15%.
Okay, they only had 4 people.
No, they needed 4 more.
They needed 4. Excuse me.
If you look at the Virginia delegation in '68,